Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of JourneyCast here at Skillibrium. And wow, what a great one I have today! I am joined by Vikas, and Vikas is an expert in value-based selling, and this is such a great topic. And Vikas, thanks so much for joining us. And I want to, before we get started, I would love to just get a little intro on who you are and kind of a little bit of your background for the listeners, so they know where you come from. I know where you come from, but let's get the listeners involved, and then we'll start right in with this awesome. I love this topic, and I know you're very passionate about it, so it's going to come through. So off to you first, Vikas.
Awesome, Rob. I appreciate it, Rob. Thanks for the invitation. I love talking about value. Just a little bit by ways of my background. So Vikas Mundada, I run the value program here at Ping Identity. Built it about 4.5 years ago, and it's running pretty strong. A little bit about me. I'm a classically trained electrical and computer engineer. Started my career doing systems engineering at one of the major defense companies. And people often ask me, well, you've got such a unique background from going from systems engineering at a defense company into value consulting. But that path was really wrought in a lot of different functional experience. So
Yeah,
I spent time in proposal finance and in supply chain and business development.
yeah.
I worked for one of the top three management consulting firms in the US, Alvarez and Marsal. Call out to them. Huge fan, still love the work that they're doing. I transitioned from there into value consulting at Oracle. And so, I learned some of the bread and butter of how people are doing value consulting and really working with so many different organizations on what value propositions look like for them, that building a new program at Ping it was hard in that the technology is different, but you're still solving a lot of the same problems. So it's been quite the run, and now I'm also watching over sales enablement. So it's fun taking value consulting into sales enablement and really leaning into that with our sales reps and our go-to-market functions.
So interesting because you started off, Vikas, with the engineering background. I know that and caught that as well. And but here you are living and breathing in sort of the art part of selling, right? So you've got the analytics. So you've actually got both sides of your brain working, which is pretty cool. You really don't get that very often, right? Either you've got an analytical brain or you've got the science of the art, right?
Yeah,
So this is the fun part, right? The fun part is the art sometimes because
sure.
it's applying all the science and making it relative in the language of the customer. And this is the cool stuff we're going to talk about. So I love that. Your background is very unique, and that's why we're really excited to have you on this episode and talk to you about this. Let's start with the basics. Okay. Value consulting in the context of a go-to-market selling team can be very complex. It's one of those things. I'm more of an art guy than a science guy in my whole career, right? I'm not a book I'm not an analytical person at all. I would be classified as an artist. So with that in mind, I would always sort of not struggle, but I would always be challenged with the business case, the spreadsheets, the numbers. I'd have to really zero in. So why is it so important to get this right? And well, the other side of it is, what are the consequences of not doing it well? And a guy like myself, I was always mindful of the fact to have the people like you around me because it's okay to know what your strengths and weaknesses are. And for everybody listening, it's okay to not know everything. It's okay to be vulnerable. The idea is you've got a go-to-market team. Sales is a team sport. So you've got to bring these people in. So what's the consequences if you don't? And why is it so important to get it right?
Yeah, I'll tell you, especially if we're talking to the sellers, right? For the
Yeah.
sellers out there, the big piece is the difference between getting it right and getting it wrong is the difference between partnering to make organizational change or maintaining the status quo.
I love that.
I mean, those are your two options, right? And look, if you partner to make organizational change happen, again, you may not be what they selected. And the number of times I've heard the frustration of, well, I did all of this work and they went with the competitor.
Yeah.
That's not always the wrong thing, right? If you follow, I don't know if you talk to Todd Capone or if you follow any of what Todd Capone does in transparent selling.
Yep.
One of the mentalities there is you may not be the right fit. And where you can help them recognize quickly that you're not the right fit, you've saved them time, you've saved them struggles, you've saved yourself time, you've saved yourself going through the struggles. And when they need you the next time, now they know what you stand for, now they know what you're good at, and now they know how you can help them. And they're much more likely to pick up the phone.
Yeah,
right
on.
Not getting, like, look, I get losses suck. I don't know, there's another word for it.
No,
they hurt.
That's it.
I worked with a rep last year, amazing deal, thought it was completely buttoned up. I mean, I think everybody thought it was completely buttoned up. And it still haunts him to this day because when he got the phone call, we're going a different direction. Like, it's haunting because we did so much work to get there. He has since gotten another phone call from that customer and said, I know we went a different direction. It was the wrong direction. Can we talk?
Yeah.
And so, like, you're building a relationship. There's actually a book on my bookshelf. I don't know if you can see it in this view, probably not. But it's it's a book that I got years ago. I think it was published back in like 05 or 06. And it's Jeffrey Gitmer's Little Black Book of Connections.
Yeah.
And in this book, like, you literally open up the cover and you're not even into the paper yet. You're still on the hardback of it. And it says, all things being equal, I might misquote this. So let's see. All things being equal, people want to do business with their friends.
Yeah. Yeah.
All things not quite so equal, people still want to do business with their friends.
Yeah.
We're in the business of relationships. And we've got to get that right. And the consequences of not getting it right is you have lost that customer, and probably everybody at that organization, when they move on, you've probably still lost them. Yeah. Right? So it doesn't matter if you change companies. It doesn't matter if the executives change and you change your patch. If the people that you didn't get it right with the first time, when you come across them again, they may not want to do business with you. So,
and we didn't even rehearse this. This is crazy because you're a great straight man for me and what I stand for and the talks that I do when I go into companies. And anytime that I am on a stage or in front of a microphone, I always say the following. And I learned this from the big guy, Tony Robbins, who I've spent a lot of time with through the last decade. Business is a spiritual game. Done. And that's what you just talked about. And it's about the human connection. And it's about serving the customer, having a servant leadership mindset, having a serving mindset, to give versus get. And I talk about the give versus get principle, how to build customers for life. And you just talked about that. You just summed that whole talk up. Because what it is you may not win that deal, but you'll win the next one and the next one because you've done the right thing and you've served them. And that's the beauty of using the art and the science together is you're qualifying the deal out versus qualifying the deal in. And that I talk about that all the time. And then, what do you mean? What do you mean? Well, if you're being curious and you're asking the right questions and you're really digging and you're getting multiple people involved and you're looking at all the aspects of it, you're qualifying it out because you're trying to find the hole.
Sure.
Right? And anybody can qualify a deal in because that's when you get the rose-colored glasses and you say, well, my gut tells me that we're going to get this deal. Right? It's like the worst thing your salesperson can say on a forecast call is, my gut tells me it's going to close. I cringed, right? I cringed.
That's right.
So,
not the signals are pointing in that direction, not the economic buyer told me this is when we're going to do it. No, absolutely. And look, there's the flip side of when you're qualifying out. It's funny, I talked to one of our VPs of sales a few weeks ago, and he ended up calling a customer. He was connected through some other channels than the rep was, ended up calling the economic buyer and asked the question. Like, I'm hearing this from my sales rep. He's hearing this from your team. How much of this is reality? And she flat said, look, we have so many other problems to solve for right now. This isn't even a priority for us to look at.
Ugh.
for another 12 months. And he said, great, look, we can, however we want to gracefully let go of, like, have the two teams disengage, let's go do that. But how about you give me a call when things are ready? Yep,
Yeah.
sounds great. Like, that's the thing about qualifying out. Save everybody cycles. There is not enough hours in the day
Right.
for even the buying team at a customer to spin their wheels and come up against a no from the economic buyer saying, guys, like, why did we go do this work? Why did you waste your time to go do this? Because now they have a bad taste in their mouth too.
So here's a great. I want to blow it. Let me see if this makes sense to you too. Is that when you're engaging with a customer and you've gone through, here's the sales process that we use, and here are the steps we're going to take together, right? I mean, I always would say that. Let's tell them the journey you're going to take them on, so there's no surprises. And one of those is the economic buyer is one of the first meetings to align all that, right? And so you don't get what you just said doesn't happen. And by the way, I've got over 4 decades in sales. I've lost count how many times that conversation has happened. And so I would always say, by the way, not a bad thing. You learn from it, right? You hopefully you want to do that more upstream, but
Right.
all you do is flip that. That's pipeline. Get it out of the forecast. It's pipeline. We'll work it. It'll come to us. Right.
That's right.
And I have another. I'm like a soundbite guy, right? So it's a natural progression to where the opportunity exists, and it's got to be natural. And that's a perfect example of, well, that was unnatural. We're trying to slam that thing in there.
That's right.
And the economic buyer's like, I got 10 more projects I got to do. I don't even know who you guys are, right?
That's right.
Horrible, right? So I love the way you brought that up. So let's look at. So we talked about when we know when we get it right, it's a beautiful thing, right? We serve the customer, and when it doesn't go well, we've talked a lot about the fails, and you and I have probably got hundreds of stories between the two of us of getting side swiped, and it's just you never forget that stuff, and it stays with you, it haunts you, forever, and there's so many as I'm thinking and talking to you now, I'm like, oh, I remember this one, oh my gosh, I remember one slipping at the end of the quarter, and because we didn't do these types of things, and there was another economic buyer. The company had merged with a company, and then that company had an economic buyer that we didn't know, right? And just some things happen. And I remember the deal slipped, and I had to go to the club trip like 2 weeks later. So here I am at club, right, celebrating, and all I could think of was, I can't believe that deal slipped. Right, and then I'm talking to the CEO, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I know you're gonna get it. You're gonna get it." I'm like, that didn't matter. It didn't matter. I didn't get it. You never forget that stuff. Look, this has been great talking to you. I know I've taken up a lot of your time, but we got one more question, and just to wrap up, what advice would you give? What would you give me 40 years ago, just starting out? Right, I'm a new rep. What would you give me? That's kind of I never say the word struggle. I always say I'm in transformation. So here I am in transformation, learning this. What would be the advice you'd give me?
I'll tell you, Rob, new or seasoned, I think we can all do this probably a little bit better, is pull your cross-functional team together. There are people in the organization that would love to either sit on a virtual room or in a room with you and brainstorm. Right? Bring the variety of experiences so that you can unlock ideas, suggestions, other ways to approach.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to ask for help. It is crazy to me, this, like, even the seasoned reps that I see who are like, oh no, I'm a lone wolf, I've got this, I know how to do this, I've been doing this for however many decades. I had one rep once tell me, I've been doing this longer than you've been alive, and I said, well, that might be true, but I think we can even teach old dogs new tricks, right? So don't be afraid for asking for help. The worst thing that happens is you fail alone.
Yeah.
Right. If you fail together, at least you had a lot of people to commiserate with.
Right.
When you fail alone, you've got nobody to blame but yourself. Quite literally, no one to blame but yourself.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I always say, be a student of your game. And what I mean by that is be a lifelong learner.
That's right.
You can see the gray hair on my head, but I am learning every single minute of the day. And I live a life of transformation because I'm always learning, always learning new things and bringing those new things to people that I meet, right? That's the other thing you want to do is you want to share that expertise, which is what we've done here today. And Vikas, you've done an amazing job. I've really, really enjoyed this episode. And I know our listeners are going to get so much out of this. So it's okay not to know everything. Be vulnerable, be a lifelong learner, and it's okay to just be uncomfortable. Right? It's okay for that because you're going to learn. You're going to get to the next level. That next level of good to great? No, great to outstanding. And this is the kind of thing that'll take you to that level. So, Vikas, can't thank you enough. This has been a great episode. I'm Rob Swymer, your host for Scalibrium Journeycast. I can't wait for the next one. But Vikas, this is one for the books, man. Thank you so much.
Rob, I appreciate the invite, man.
Thanks, brother. Well, we'll start with the basic level because we've got all levels listening to this in the go-to-market executives, right? We've got individual contributors. We've got new salespeople like us that have been around a while. So how do you define the basic level of value consulting or however you say it, value engineering or whatever you want to call it? What's the basic level? Take us through that first. Let's get a baseline.
Yeah, so I'll take this from a couple of different lenses. So I know when I look for people to join my team, I look for three things. And it's a little bit different than if you're talking about sales. But like when I look for people to join my team, I think of three things. Do they have some sort of consulting experience? So can they speak consultatively? Frankly, I love people that have change management experience. So people that have taken things like ProSci and understand the ADKAR framework. Like I love those people because a lot of what we're doing in sales is change management. I love people who have some sort of industry experience. So like I said, I'm Ping Identities in the cybersecurity, but even a subset of identity and access management, right? So if I think, do they have one of those pairings or something in an adjacency where they can at least speak the language? Do they know what SaaS means? Like something like that, right?
Right.
And then finally, do they have financial experience? Or finance experience? Can they go model? Can they? And it's funny. I don't need an FP&A person on my team, but I need somebody who can put a simple spreadsheet together and say, here are the numbers, but here's the story that it ties back to. And I'm good with somebody having one or two of the three of those things: consulting experience, industry experience, and finance experience. If you have two of those three, we'll train on the other one because then you can be really solid in both the art and the science. Yeah. And I think a lot of value consulting happens to be both. So that's on the, like, if you're joining my team kind of perspective. On the sales part of it, what's the basic level? The basic level is having the interest and the aptitude, and not to overuse a phrase, grit, to go do the research.
Yeah.
Like, will you go spend the cycles to go do the research and try to put a narrative together that is compelling? That the reality is you also have to have thick skin because the very first conversation you have, it's all going to fall apart.
Yeah.
But at least you came in with a point of view versus coming in hands open, just asking for information.
And isn't that point of view sort of best practices that you've learned with all your customers? So you have conviction, right? You have certainty around that. So you have the right to say, outside your four walls, here's what we're seeing. And
that's right. That's exactly it.
Okay. And then maybe you cite 3 or 4 or 5 things and they may relate to 2 or 3 of them. So at least you got to start, right? And, the other thing I always say is don't worry about getting it perfect. Just get it started. Right?
That's right.
Because you're going to be collaborating, right? This is a collaboration, everybody. Very important word that we haven't even said yet. This is all about collaborating. This is not done in a bubble. This is just like any other sales process where you're putting this into a process or a methodology, that you cannot do that process in a bubble just internally. Just like you can't do a mutual activity plan internally and not publish it with your customer weekly. I used to do that all the time. Weekly. Send it to the economic buyer. Well, he's going to get ticked off. No, so what? He's going to read it. At least he's going to know what's going on. And then that conversation, a little callback from a few minutes ago when the person said, I have 10 more projects. I don't even know who you guys are. You're going to know that the first week instead of the 28th week. Yeah.
And
There you
if
go.
nothing else, like the number of times I've had economic buyers say, I don't need to be involved in the sausage making process.
Yeah.
Like that's why I delegated this to my team. Totally get it, economic buyer. The reason I'm providing this to you is I know you're probably getting regular updates from your internal team. This is to show that we're aligned in what's going on. And that way you're always top of mind. I think that's incredibly important. That way they're seeing it.
Yeah, so here's the tidbit, everybody listening, right? What I got out of that little sentence was top of mind, right? Top of mind. And you have got to be top of mind because we know the business now is running at 1,000,000 miles an hour. They're doing all the research, right? They already know who you are, what you do, how you do it. They don't know your why because they can't figure that out. That's the value you bring, and that's what we're talking about today. But they have an opinion of you, whether it's right or wrong. And by the way, they've been doing so much research, right, Vikas, that their opinion, they have certainty around that opinion. They're convinced that that's what you do.
That's exactly it. What is I feel like I've seen the stat from Gartner. I've probably seen it from other value consultants. Something like 83% of the research has been done before you're even at the door. Before
Absolutely.
they even started talking to you. They
Yep.
have great conviction that they already know who the players are in the game that they want to talk to, that they want to do business with. And that's huge. We live in an information era.
Yeah.
And so people have access to it. Now it's a matter of what are we going to do with it?
Right. And that's one part of the equation. And I'll tell you what, here's how you differentiate. You take that information, you make a human connection, and your language is different, and you serve the customer. That's what we're talking about today. And I'll tell you what, that's what will make you memorable. You want to be memorable. So I always say, be bold, be brave, be memorable. This is exactly what we're talking about today. This is brave. It's bold because you're putting numbers in front of them. You're doing it with conviction in their language. That's bold, right? You're going to them and saying, here's how you talk. Here are the numbers that you talk about.
Sure.
And that's bold, right? That's brave.
Yeah.
And you're going to be memorable too if you make that connection and that storytelling, right? Now, I used to we used to do things like I think at the beginning, one of the use cases that we would always do is we bring in some value-based selling examples right at the beginning. We would ask questions like one of my mentors, Marva Baylor. She was with me at Splunk, and she used to have this great question. I use it all the time. I learned it about 11 years ago from her. Who else do you benchmark against? Who do you benchmark against? And
Right.
if I went to, a Fortune 50, they'd always say, we benchmark against, the big behemoth, right? Or the big player. And if they were honest, if you built that relationship, they'd tell you that, and in some cases you have a value-based case that you've already done for that person, right? Or that company. Always ask, always be curious about that. But that gives you credibility right up front because then you can say, hey, you're going to go through this journey and eventually you're going to need, a value case. And let me go through one and how we did this and get them emotionally involved in that, right? They have to be involved in their own rescue, right? This is a way to do that, right? Is to kind of show them that, life raft at the beginning, right? What they're going to be coming up to. Right. So I love that. I think it's the beginning, it's the middle, and it's the end. If you weave it in all the way, then it just becomes part of the collaboration, right? That's the key. That's the key. All right. So as you get better and the sales reps, they start using this on a regular basis, and they start really learning this language, get to know the concepts and the facilities behind all this. What do you use? What other tools or strategies are kind of layered on top of this to even boost it further? Do you have a value assessment team that just does this, a favorite style, or how does that, what did you see worked and continues to work that the listeners can kind of, even if they're just starting out, they can sort of kind of build a framework, kind of, they're building a house, right? Here's the foundation. Give them a little bit. What can they do now to build that foundation?
Yeah, it's funny, Rob. You just happen to say, who do you benchmark yourself against?
Yeah.
And if you've already had that, if you've already have a case that's built out because of that customer, or your value
Yeah.
assessment team has built a case out, and I think it's an incredible inlay for this, right? Incredible segue. I I am a strong believer, and I have been for a long time, of solving the immediate problem, and
Yeah.
then if you solve that problem, find a way to replicate the solution. And there's a company out there. It's a not for profit, I think. The company's name's Not Impossible Labs. And I heard them. I told you I struggle with the art part of this a little bit.
Yeah.
And these guys are incredible artists, but they make a statement of solve for one, and then find a way to expand for many.
Yeah. I've
And
heard that. Yep.
that's what our value assessment team does. Is we solve for the customer, and then where we can, we will genericize it. We'll try to make it a little bit more friendly, that others can take what we've already built and use that as a starting point for their next customer, right?
Yeah.
And so we make all of that available to all the sales reps, but we do it with intent. Is I suffer from blank paper syndrome probably as much as the next person, and I think customers do too, right? If you
Yeah.
say, I know you're going to need a business case, good luck. Now their hands, now they don't know what to go do. But if you give them a starting point and say, here's what we've seen helpful for other customers, even if they don't love it, at least they have something to start with.
Yeah. I completely agree.
Yeah, and we have a value assessment team. I've worked with value assessment teams for a long time now, whether building or working inside of one. And the nice thing is, when reps understand what the value of those teams are, it ends up juicing their deals so much more. But I will tell you, the one thing that I see, or a thing that I see very often, is people think value assessment teams shouldn't be in front of customers. And I think that is an incredible miss.
Oh, I do too. Yeah.
Right? These are people that live, breathe, built the story, and to not encourage or not have them in front of your customer to tell the story, and relying on yourself as a rep to communicate the story with the same fortitude and the same experience as the person who put it together, I think becomes a miss. Should you collaborate on it? 100%. Should there be a back and forth? Absolutely. But to dismiss the idea that they should be there side by side with you. Look, I've been fortunate. I've pushed that motto and that mentality every place I've been. Reps are incredibly encouraged by it, because I find people that can actually tell a good story. I do know organizations that hire folks that are building it kind of back office. Look, here's an assessment, just go take it, you're good. I think it's a disservice for the customer. Frankly, I think it's a disservice for the rep.
No, I agree. 100%. I think that I would always bring that value team in there, and I mean, you want them to use their language, and you want the customer to see that you've got a team behind you. You're not just doing a spreadsheet and plugging in numbers.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So what's something I kind of want to flip again? I always ask this question. So, I mean, you're a science guy and by nature. So, what's something that you might have been taught or learned in the academic, right?
Yeah.
And didn't go well when you applied it to the real world, and then, how did you adapt that? And like, we've all done it, right? It's like, oh, this is the new concept, we're going to play it, and then it just falls flat, right?
Yeah, Rob, I might flip this question a little bit.
Yeah.
I'd say something that was actually taught that I underestimated the impact of:
Oh, cool. Let's talk about that.
change management.
Ah,
People talk about it. I mean, in most schools, like if you think about it classically in schools, most people don't teach it. When you get professional, it shows up in different classes here and there. And you think, why do I care? Like, this isn't important. People are getting paid to do this job. They're just going to go do it. And the unfortunate reality is that's not how the world works. Like,
No.
you're going to pour your time and attention to things that you love, things that you desire.
right.
And so change management, I think, is this incredible skill that the best reps, the ones that are at club every year, the ones that are hitting 3-4 times their quota, they exude. They just bring in with every conversation. They know that that's what's going to have to happen.
Yeah.
Newer reps, I think, forget that, or don't know that it's a necessary skill. And so studying things like pro-sci and understand, I mentioned this at the top, looking at something like the ADKAR framework, which if you don't know ADKAR, it's awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement, right? Applying that into what you're showing, what you're saying, how you're doing discovery, because that will help start moving the needle, not just with the one person that you're talking to, but it then invites you into other conversations. It allows them to feel comfortable that when you get in a room with their executives, you're going to make them look good, not why did I bring this person into the call?
Yeah, so it's the language that you use, right? It's okay to use that language with all levels because I used to say that, be curious and ask those questions that you may already know the person that you're in front of does not have the answer. So you're not talking down to them. You're being authentic, but ask that question. And then what's going to happen is they're going to jog and they're going to go, you know what? I don't know that. I need to call in Joe. Right. And then you've got more people coming into your sales process, not because they don't have the expertise, it's because they shouldn't. They don't think like that. They have other people they can bring in just like we have other people. And then you start to actually mentor and train them to realize that they're not going to be able to do this by themselves, just like we're not going to do it by themselves. All right, perfect. Great. All right. So we talked about, you get a difficult account or somebody that's not leaning in. They're not being open and honest, right? Or they're hedging. They're kind of holding back, right? We all have those accounts, and I think we talked about bringing in some best practices from outside their four walls. I think that's really important, right? You'd say, and we talked about that, and I think that who you benchmark, however you say it, I think that's valuable. Would you agree?
100% agree.
Okay,
we live in a world of the information age, right? Like I feel like we all grew up in the information age. I mean, I've got my phone here, right?
Yeah.
We have access to so much information.
Yeah.
That if it's difficult to get information, and the reality is sometimes it is because old school procurement people don't want to give you information. They think it's a negotiation lever that if they give you less, they're able to negotiate. That's fine. I get it. That's the reason I try to be as transparent as I can be. And we teach our reps the same thing is here are your levers that help you adjust price, help you adjust outcomes. And as long as everybody can see that, but also look, if customers don't want to give you information, draw from similar company size, industry, experiences, leverage tools. AI is all the hype right now. Go use AI and know that it has lots of faults. But is it better than doing nothing? The answer is still yes.
Yeah.
You're going to be wrong regardless. At least have a starting point to work from.
I completely agree. Don't worry about getting it perfect, as I say. Just get it started, right? That's that right there in a nutshell. And I think it can be intimidating. It can be uncomfortable. But here's the growth mindset at work, right? Being comfortable, being uncomfortable. And this is a really good example of that. For somebody like me, I was very uncomfortable, and I had to learn to lean into that and to learn the vernacular. And I surrounded myself with people like you, and they gave me those words. They gave me that vernacular, and I eventually learned it, and I could then be comfortable with it and really own it. Talk about the storytelling that you have to weave into this, right? Because you're talking about the science. Let's talk about the storytelling. How do you do that?
Yeah. The art part of this, I'll tell you, being classically trained engineer, the art part of this is always the hardest part.
Yeah.
and it's hard because for me, I used to live in spreadsheets, and I'm really good at them, right? That's something that I was always very proud of. But the numbers only mean so much when it's not in the context of the business, not in the context of the individual. And so even though you can go, like, it's great to know what a CFO's KPIs are or their MBOs are, use whatever 3-letter acronym you want that's measuring the goals of a business, the goals of an individual organization. But being able to show why working with you is different, being able to, and I tell my teams corporate strategy, business initiative, value proposition. And if you can't distill the three together, if you only have the value proposition, now it's not in alignment with the customer that you're talking about. If you've spent the 30 minutes to go do the research on the corporate strategy, but don't understand why what you have is good for them, you've missed the basic pitch. And then if you don't know that there's business initiatives that are tying the three together, they don't have any incentive to pay for anything. Right? So you have to have all three of those. And that's my basic framework for how do I go talk to an executive buyer versus how do I go talk to somebody who's doing the work, right? The narrative changes. When I'm talking to somebody who's doing the work, we start with a little bit of the technology and help them see from the technology stack upward what the benefit is.
Yeah.
But if I'm talking up high, I start with this is what you're looking to do, and here's how we help you get there better, faster, cheaper, with less risk, whatever the fun languages of the day.
Yeah, I get it. That's perfect. I love that. So we wanted to deep dive into, how you're evolving the development, right, for the case for change. Talk about that. This is kind of a subtitle you wanted to bring up, and it was all about the case for change and value selling. So talk to me about case for change. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so it's funny when I talk about case for change, there's a lot of people think, and maybe they don't think, but they sometimes forget when they're in this cycle that people are buying technology for the sake of buying technology, right? Yeah. They forget that people are buying technology as a change agent for a problem, whether individually, organizationally, that they're trying to solve for. But even if they have the funds, you still, especially in the economic situations that we're in now, money's not free, right? We had that period of time, call it 5-10 years ago, where money was cheap. Yeah. People were growing at all costs because it didn't cost anything. Right? And now there's even more scrutiny around what are the dollars being spent on. And so helping people develop that case for change, not just because there's a need for it, but because there's something else going on organizationally. That's where I think the imperative is, at least today. Maybe that'll shift again in the future. But right now it's how do we help them talk about the dollar and cents, but also how do we help put it in a narrative that makes sense internally?
Yeah, and because we know the one thing we can count on, right? It's a cliche, but it's change, and I also want to kind of bring in, I was doing a talk just the other day, and we were talking about how the economic buyers, they switch, the CFOs, they switch, right? And we were going through sort of what do we do with that? We have to have multiple champions. We have to have multiple economic buyers, right? In these days, I remember 10 years ago, we checked that box. Hey, I've got my economic buyer, right? It was like, you did a great job, Rob. Move on to the next one. And now you could have 3-4 economic buyers, and so. This actually ties really good into this, and it's kind of crazy. I just did a talk on it, so I'm kind of it's in my head, and I'm saying I'm going to be talking to Vikas. This is perfect. I want to bring this up. You have got to have a solid business case because it may transcend many different people coming in and out of the process, right? So talk to us. How do we make sure that is so tight that if an economic buyer leaves, another one comes in, or a CFO leaves and another one comes in, what do we do to ensure that it still has the momentum? That's a great question. It's $1 million question or a multi-million-dollar question.
Hey, I'll tell you, it's huge, right? There were days where pre-COVID, we had the luxury. We had the luxury of being in conference rooms and bringing people from different disciplines to the table.
Yeah.
And even going up to a whiteboard, and like the job at the time was getting everybody on the same page.
Yeah.
Having the open conversation, seeing the friction in the room, and getting people to see collectively we're moving in the right direction, right? That's, a lot of people think that the case for change or the value story has to be strictly financially oriented. And I think finance is a huge part of it. Yeah, I think there has to be dollars and cents.
Yeah.
That has to happen. But there also has to be, if the end goal is understood, we understand what the outcomes are going to be.
Yeah.
We know that there are going to be roadblocks along the way. That's just going to happen. I've been doing this 2 decades. I've never seen a project just go perfectly. Not once.
You and me both, right?
Right? And if that's going to be the case, continuing to understand what that end objective is, what the end goal is, what we're trying to get to, what that case is that we're approaching, continuing to stay aligned there and having the multiple parties and multiple
Yeah.
personas and stakeholders and economic
Yeah.
buyers and champions and developers all seeing the same journey helps us remove those pitfalls very fast.
Yeah, completely agree. I guess I've got another. There's so many things I want to talk to you about. So cool. So one of the things as a leader that I recognized, Vikas, and I hope you're going to be aligned to me on this. When I went to London and led that country, and just at the beginning of COVID, it was. Thank you very much. I got to London and COVID hit. So what we noticed though was we needed a strong CFO ready business case, because what was happening was the budgets were being constrained and business was being led different, as you know, for all virtual. There wasn't a lot of going on, not a lot of meetings, so everybody was doing everything virtually.
Yeah.
And what we noticed was we would have, for example, MedPick or any methodology that you have, we'd be running those and we'd be running them to the T. We had operational cadence and excellence. We were doing awesome. And we'd get the deal and we'd be on the 1 yard line, and the economic buyer or 2 or 3 other economic buyers would say, we're good to go, except I've got to run this by my CFO.
Yeah.
Right? How many times did that happen? And for everybody that's listening out there, I know you're smiling, or maybe you're not smiling. Maybe you got some PTSD. You may have some PTSD about this, but I know I do. But I'll tell you, it's like the 12th hour, and then it's like, oh, we got to run this by the CFO. So, this is the kind of thing that what you're talking about transcends all that. And if you open it up at the beginning and you take them through that journey and you tell them what's going on, this is going to happen. This is what we're going to need. We're going to need this from you. We're going to give this to you. It's a give-get. Then I'm assuming you're on track with this, that you're like, this is where this really has value. Not to play a pun on words, right? But the value of value-based selling is the fact that this will transcend that hiccup, because we've all had them.
That's right. I'll tell you, the worst thing to have happen, and the number of times I've seen it happen, is you get right to the end.
Yeah.
And your champion's excited.
Yeah.
The teams are excited.
Yeah.
And then they realized we missed a step. And the step, I say it's a step, but look, I used to run a procurement team. If procurement's not involved, you've missed a step. If an economic buyer isn't bought in, you've missed a step. I literally heard from a customer. Today's Friday, so I literally heard from a customer on Tuesday that, well, now it has to go here, and now it has to go here, and they're on vacation, and it's summertime, so you're not planning for those things,
right?
But you could have been, right? And so there's some steps. Fortunately, we were able to work around some of those things, but like I had this massive fail once.
You just talked about sort of the salespeople, right? Different levels of sales and the go-to-market executives. So let's talk about value consulting in terms of the sales process. Now, that process is different than methodology. So you got MedPick and all that, but the process, right, is, okay, here are the 5, 6, or 7 stages that you go through, and here are the gates, right? What do you need to be thinking about at the beginning and to the end of the deals, right? So some companies have 4 or 5 stages, and other ones have 11 stages. They have, 3, 4-year sales cycles. We've dealt with them all, right? So I've worked with companies that have 3 stages. That's it, right? It's a very simple product, right? It's
Wow.
boom, boom, boom. Yeah, that's really good. I've done that. And then I've worked with companies that have 11 and 12 stages, and then everything in between. How do you weave this in, and how important is it to start at the beginning, and where does it come in? Where does it fall? I know the end. I want to hear what you say and how you teach the listeners how you weave this into the sales process.
Yeah, I think I'm going to start this with just taking a little bit of a step back, because you said a few things that I think we've got to really distill and clarify for the listeners. Their sales qualification, their sales process, and their sales methodology.
Right.
They are each very distinctly different things.
Yes.
And more often than not, people confuse qualification and process or qualification and methodology. And as soon as you start doing that, you forget why they're intentionally different, right? Sales qualification, think of things like MEDIC, MedPick, use whatever acronyms you want, but being able to qualify both with the customer, right? You don't want to qualify on your own, qualify with the customer. Do you know what the what your ideal customer profile looks like, that should be a first line of, we know we're not good for you, customer, for XYZ reason. We know we tend to be expensive, or we're not full feature enough for you. But that already starts building that relationship. That's part of that qualification, right? Help them qualify you out, help them qualify you in.
Yep.
On the sales process is exactly what you were saying is, you may have 3 stages, you may have 12 stages, but fundamentally it's, are we prospecting? Are we qualifying? Are we analyzing needs? Are we helping them with the case for change? And then I know a lot of people think the sales process ends with, great, got the PO, signed paperwork, good to go.
Yeah, no.
And I think when you're in a transactional business, that's probably okay. Even then I struggle, but maybe it's okay.
Yeah.
But in the life that we live in now, when especially SaaS world or software, any kind of software business, or I don't know, annual recurring revenue kind of business, there's the business of what happens post sale. How are you helping with the implementation? How are you helping with continue to measure the impact of change, right? And so I talk about often there's a case for change before the sale and there's a case for change after the sale.
Yeah.
And being able to talk about both of those and feeling comfortable to flex back and forth. I still think the why, what, how, or how many, how often, so what on the post sale is incredibly important.
Yeah.
So that we can show that there was a case for change and that we're living up to that. And then on the sales methodology piece, right, that third leg of the stool, that's really the communications model. How are we communicating with externally to the customers, the partners that might be involved, and how are we communicating internally on, this is why it's good, this is why it's important. I think we have to look at all 3 of those. Value touches all of those.
Yeah.
Sales reps are implicit in all of those areas. And so making sure that they see the difference and then don't become disillusioned that, oh, well, ops is talking to me about this. Like, why do they care? Well, they care because it fits into these areas.
Yeah.
But at some point, somebody's got to understand how the 3 map together. So I'll start there. Kind of finishing off on the question that you asked, like, why is it important at what stages?
Yeah.
Incredibly important in qualification. It's incredibly important even in prospecting, right? So when we have marketing involved, I know marketing and sales are largely combined in a lot of go-to-market functions or go-to-market organizations. So how are we speaking and what's the handoff look like? There's a lot of work that goes into prospecting. If I think of account-based marketing teams, if I think about field marketing teams, they do a ton of research. How much of that research lands back to the sales rep? So they say, okay, here's what's happening in the industry. Here are scenarios that the customers or like customers care about. How do I use that to qualify? How do I know where I fit? And then as you start getting closer to the end of the deal cycle, it's making sure the economic buyers involved has been informed, is in the language they care about versus the language we want to talk about.
Right.
So I think it's important largely across the board, but very strongly in the beginning and at the end.
Sounds good. Yeah, let's talk about a fail.
I think failure is a part of learning, right?
Yeah.
I was in Houston. We had everything built out. We were with the VP of IT. Everybody's celebrating. So, we're at happy hour afterwards. And at the end of the night, he says, hey, there's one thing that I learned earlier this week is what the executive team is bonused on. You're like, oh, great. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And he tells us, and the proposition going forward would have been very counter and very expensive to what the executive team's taking home. And I mean, that became a work until 3 a.m., change the offering. The offering was still the right offering for the organization.
Yeah.
But it changed the whole financial case because you missed that one thing that the economic buyer is really going to care about. And so it does take a little bit of that homework. And I still call it a fail because that's something that we should have uncovered months, if not at least weeks before that final board meeting. But we got there, but it was definitely a struggle to get there.
Yeah, and I love what you said too about how it has to be in the customer's language, but it also has to be in the customer's financial language, right? What's important, right? So we talk about metrics all the time, and
Sure.
and I went through all this with a go-to-market team just this week, and it's like, it was like pulling teeth, right? Like, give me another metric. Oh, well, I'm like, that's not a metric. That's an emotion, right? Okay.
Sure.
Yeah. We do it faster or better. That's an emotion, right? So everybody sort of, and I want to put this out because I think this is important with a value-based selling conversation. It's the how, the what, and the why. We all know that.
Sure.
And you and I could talk for 8 hours about how we do things and what we do. But if you ask the person why they do it, it's crickets for a couple of minutes because no one's really established that. And
Sure.
I believe, and I'm I want to be provocative here because I really think that even though this is science, Vikas, I think this is about the why. Because, right? Okay, great. Because
every time,
Good,
and
good.
we start with why. We
Good.
don't let why come last. We go
Okay.
why, what, how every time.
Love it.
Technology. Look, we're going to have disruptive technologies. I've probably seen 4 of them in my lifetime. There'll probably be more of them that come up. Sure, disruptive technologies happen. The why happens to become this is disruptive.
Yeah.
But outside of that, most people start thinking of a lot of technology, so the how, as commoditized.
Yeah.
So then what are we doing and why are we doing it? And we flip it. Like I know Simon Sinek, I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek. This is one of his things as well. But as long as we can start with the why, maybe they don't become our customer, and that's okay. They still went and solved their problem. That was the intent. And maybe then they'll come back next time and say, you were such great partners to us the last time. Maybe there's more we need to go do. Maybe there's more that we want to bring you in as a trusted partner now. Like we solved the problem that we had, but now you're trusted, right?
Yeah. 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 And I have a formula for any go-to-market executive when I talk about value-based or I talk about telling a story or looking at how you impact the customer. It's impact plus emotions that leads to massive action. You've got to have all those three, and you can talk about impact on a spreadsheet all you want, right? And every day, all day, you can do it. But if you don't have the emotions around that, what's the why? What's driving that? Is it a culture issue? Is it a board level initiative? Is it bonuses or whatever that emotion is, or serving the customer better? Those emotions, that's what will drive massive action. We can get action with impact. You can show me a spreadsheet, and they're going to buy something. Right? They're going to say, okay, X plus Y equals Z. We see it. You get that point. We're going to buy something. But for a massive deal, if you put the emotions in it, which is what we're talking about now in a value-based selling, looking at the art and the science together, man, you can move that needle, right? Then you get the history-making deals. You get the career-making deals. Listen up, people that are listening. This is career-making deals that we're talking about. This is not just making your number. This is making your number by 400%. And that's where you want to be, right? So it's going from good to great. No, there's one more level. I always say it, Vikas. It's great to outstanding. And that's what we want to do here. And that's what value-based selling is about. So I love that you said all that. And I think it's important that the listeners understand that because this is a whole nother game and another language that in most cases, customers aren't used to hearing. This is a differentiator, right? Is it talk about how what you've seen in the field? We talked about a little bit about the fails, but I'm going to go sideways here a little bit. Give us a little story about somewhere where you went in there, you used this language, or you saw somebody use this language, and the customer just leaned in. They took massive action because they saw that you were educated and you had a different language. You differentiated yourself. Would you have a story about that? I know I put you on the spot.
No, so many of them. I'll tell you one thing that, and I tell this to our sales reps. So now being a bigger part of sales enablement, something that I tell a lot of sales reps is come in with some empathy, come in with a point of view, but you don't have to be prescriptive because you don't understand enough yet to be prescriptive.
Right.
Right. But come in with a point of view, show that you've done your research. And so I'll use an airline, for example. We have Ping has airline customers everywhere.
Sure. Yeah.
It's huge. But if you don't understand their value proposition to their customers, what their customer journey looks like, and just showing up understanding, we all use this every day, or maybe not so much anymore because of COVID, but we all used to use it all the time, right?
Right.
And so we're consumers as well, and being able to show the empathy of here's how much better it could be for yourself, for your team, for your organization. We had one where we put a customer journey in front of the customer. We put their customer's journey in front of them. And it was a customer journey. Honestly, we got it from Boston Consulting Group. Boston Consulting
Oh,
Group
yeah.
puts out customer journeys all the time. And look, I look at the thought leaders out there to say, how are they talking to customers? How are they talking to the people that they engage with all the time? And then where do we align along that journey? Because that's the language that your customers care about. And so when we showed that to them and said, here's the reality, if this is what your customers are doing, and this is the engagement points that you have, we'll use identity because that's the space I'm in now.
Yeah.
Here's where identity and access management fits into this journey. Even if you're trying to solve a problem, maybe it feels like on the back end of the journey, what about these other points that you could be solving for as well? And so, yeah, you get one drip here, but then you're building the skills, you're building the technical infrastructure that you can do it everywhere. And that changes from what could be a really small opportunity and a really small change that maybe touches one team to a much more massive opportunity.
Yeah.
Because now the light bulbs are going off of,
Sure.
wait, I can do this everywhere. And that's the idea, right? That becomes transformational, not just for the person or the group of the team that's selling the deal, but for the team that's implementing, for the team that's consuming, frankly, to the top line and bottom line for the organization that's incorporating the tech into their stack.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And that's serving the customer, right? And then what you're doing there is you're building value for multiple use cases. So we all know about the land and expand, and a lot of sales teams they're happy with, oh, let's land and then we'll expand. Well, why can't we just do it all, right? Why can't we get a bigger deal? If you're getting a small deal and you're doing 3x and 4x, that's great. Well, we used to do that at Splunk years back, but I would always want to at least start with a bigger deal. Even the first deal should be bigger, because then of course your 3 and 4x are much bigger too. Everything is exponential, right? So, and the way you do that is with that value-based selling. We've seen this over and over and over again, right? All right, so let's flip the conversation. I want to go back to what makes you. I really like you. I like what you stand for, and you have a servant leadership mindset, like myself. So we're very aligned, and that transcends into how you teach and how you implement these kinds of things, right?